And it looks like it'll be in about, oh, it's slowing down. In 2 seconds. And now.
Are you on DVD too?
Yes.
Good evening. Welcome to Koviki Talks. Koviki Talk is a 21 episode series where we talk about all things COVID-19 from the Pacific Islander perspective. So that is research, vaccine, education, awareness. One of those things that has to do with COVID-19 is how we vote safely. But before we get into today's episode, the PI community, the Pacific Islander community, received heartbreaking news last week that one of our sisters has passed. And we thought it was appropriate at this moment. And actually, I believe her services are happening right now as we speak in Salt Lake City. And Rita would want us to continue on. So we have with us to talk through that with us and talk through some of the things and give us his reflection of Rita's life and her passion is Joseph Sea. Joseph was born in Los Angeles, grew up in Tutuila and Upolu Islands with his Ainga in Samoa, and eventually emigrated to Duwamish Coast Salish territory with his father, Aitulangi Yosefa, and his siblings in 1994. He has 15 years of experience in direct service and youth development work, anti-racist community organizing, nonprofit leadership, and administration. Joseph champions systems change work, the centers, the leadership, and history of most impacted communities. He is committed to reducing and ending the impacts of systemic racism on the lives of Indigenous, Black, and Brown communities through coalition building, centering anti-racism, creating intergenerational leadership opportunities, and working with the BIPOC communities to co-design our vision of beloved community. Joseph is Fa'afafine. He is a fierce advocate for QTBIPOC communities. He is critically concerned with political systems that cripple or erase the voice and leadership of NHPI communities, and will continue to provide soul labor in re-envisioning what it means for NHPI families to feel belonging and establish cultural home within the state of Washington. Welcome, Joseph.
Hey, thank you, Carl. I'm gonna have to send you a short version of the bio.
All the accolades.
Yeah. It's so good to see you. We just literally had you on a couple of weeks ago with Sister Rita and Malo. So it was sad for us to hear the news, especially since she's one of the advocates with you, along with all of us, fighting, trying to get our community to adhere to our COVID-19 rules. So thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity. You know, it's such a tremendous vacancy, right? I mean, what a beautiful, powerful spirit and force, right? The only thing that I can think of is the force was really strong with that one, right?
Yeah.
And thinking about you know, just the tremendous loss that I think we are all experiencing, especially you know, that type of leadership, right? Margarita Saatini gave her whole life, her soul, her, you know, like she didn't just worked because she thought this was something that was important. Like it was her whole being that was involved, right? The way that she gave up her body, her, you know, her time, her resources from the place that she chooses to live, like everything was so significant, right? She operated from this really this belief that you know, like, I mean, you see it in a quote right behind me, right? The world you want requires you to be civically engaged, right? And so wherever your feet was, that was the place that you can make change, right? And I think that was what was really grounding about Margarita Saatini's leadership. And so I'm here on behalf of the Pi-CoPCE, the Pi-CoPCE NHPI Policy Council, just to share my condolences with the family, with our community, and also just to remind us, you know, that our communities have taken a toll, and for people to find ways to pause, you know, and grieve, and make sure that we are, are paying attention to the rest that our bodies and our minds need, right? Before, there's so much happening. And I think our communities aren't often given that chance to pause and to grieve the loved ones that have transitioned. And so, today is a significant day. Go vote. Sina Uipi will tell you all about why it's so important. And this is like the legacy of Margarita Sattini's work. And so we're hoping to continue to light it, to keep it going, so that, the darkness doesn't overtake, right? As long as people carry this fire forward, we can do this. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Joseph. Okay, so I am your host, Carl, and with me is Nackie. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yep. I'm Nackie. I'm one of your hosts for Koviki Talk, and we just wanted to take a minute to remember our sister who fought a good fight. And so, yeah.
I think we always talk about, Nackie and I always talk about on our podcast about how people change other people's lives, and they never really, sometimes you never get that call to say, hey, you said something at a meeting that changed my life and really resonated with me. Or, hey, you had a program that served, the community and it helped change my life at certain points. And Rita Sattini is really one of those examples of, she changed so many lives that she never got, that never echoed back, I'm sure, because of all the different programs and all the different ways that she worked to elevate the Pacific Islander community. She's just it's a wonderful life to see and be a part of. Nackie and I got a small piece of a window into the work that she does. And she's going to be missed, but like I said, I'm sure that she would want us to continue on and do the work that she did with so much passion. So
Right.
Let's see, we are 1 day away from Election Day. 98 million Americans have already voted. And that is 71% of the total turnout of 2016. So 71% of the total turnout have already voted. There are states right now, Texas is at 108% of the total turnout of 2016. Hawaii is at 110%. And then you've got a bunch of states at 98, like Nevada, Oregon's 96, Washington's 97, Montana's 99. There's red and blue states that are both right on the cusp of record turnout, or at least eclipsing 2016. So now is the time to make sure that our voice is heard. And we say that getting registered is the first thing to do. Being educated on the issues and voting it's tomorrow if you haven't already voted. And so a lot of questions are out there, like, how do we vote safely? Am I already registered? What does this state look like? So all those questions, and it's so timely that we get to this today. That's our topic today. And Nackie's going to introduce our panelists that will take us through that from an expert point of view.
Right. So we have Sina here. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to make sure that I get all the right information out about you. You are with Epic. Give me a second here. My camera is slow. I apologize for the delay. So we have Sina Uipi is with the Washington, D.C.-based Policy Associates. In this role, Sina leads EPIC's national policy and advocacy efforts towards the organization's mission to advance social justice and increase the political power of NHPI communities. She is thrilled to bring greater awareness to Pacific Islanders' needs at the national level. As a proud product of the California public education system, Sina earned her BA at SFSU in political science, including 2 minors in counseling and women and gender studies. She was raised in the LA area and is a first-generation Tongan American daughter to her parents and community, who has helped shape the advocate she is today. Prior to joining EPIC, Sina was a senior civil rights fellow at OCA, Asian Pacific American Advocates, where she focused on the policy priorities such as education, immigration, census, and technology workforce development. Thank you, Sina. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
So we want to get right into it, right?
Yes, thank you both. Thank you so much for having me. So as far as voter eligibility, I know it really varies across a lot of different states, including some of the US territories. Um, so as far as, like answering the question, who can vote, like I feel like it can be complicated somewhat for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, depending on where we are based in the US or in the territories and what our status is as well. The biggest variations across states are definitely in voter rights and for current and formerly incarcerated folks. And excuse me. And then just also really being mindful of the resources that are available for folks who are also in the military and who are overseas as well. Next slide. So these are some of the states that have passed or adopted the automatic voter registration. Clearly, it's not in all states, but they're in a few, and especially where we have our community based in. Some people may already be registered to vote and not know it. These states automatically register people through the Department of Motor Vehicles or other government agencies. And this has been a proven way to increase voter access. It's really important to note that those who are who are DACA recipients must opt out when getting IDs or licenses. Next slide. And then here's just a visual of states that have passed or adopted same-day/election day voter registration. So for some people, it's not too late to register. In these states that you see that are in blue, you can register in person on election day. So California, Washington, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, still some of the key states that our community is in as well.
So Sina, quick question. Was on the last slide, was California automatic voter registration? Okay. And then,
yes.
But you can still register at the polls. What would be if they're automatic registration, would you know if you weren't automatically registered? Because I'm just seeing that it shows on both slides that it's automatic, but then you can also register at the polls.
Yeah, so I think for a lot of people that I know specifically, like here in California, who probably did receive their ballot in the mail and know that they're registered, but would still rather go in person to vote, they still have the option to do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Also, I have a question, Sina. I have a family member that is visiting her grandbaby, and she's from San Diego, and now she's up here. Tomorrow's voting. Can she vote up here, or does she have to go in and register, or what's the deal? Can she vote here, or does she have to wait, or?
Is she?
She's registered in San Diego, but she's up here visiting, and so
she's in the Bay Area.
Yeah, she's in the Bay Area.
I believe she's still able to vote, especially if she's still in California.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe she had to vote in her area. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine because I actually was registered to vote in DC.
Oh,
But I got like I had let them know that I'm currently in California, and so my ballot was sent here.
oh, awesome.
Yeah.
All right, good to know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Problem. Next slide. So basically, you know, like I think as much as we want to um, hope that a lot of our community gets out there and vote, whether it's by mail or in person, right? Like there's still a good chance and a good possibility that a lot of them haven't yet, right? And so I think it's really important that, you know, we make a plan, um, whether it is in person. And if you have, if you did get it in mail by mail and you filled it out, I recommend, you know, dropping it off at a drop box or just going directly to your local polling place to
Right.
drop your ballot off as well, because you really want to make sure that that you don't miss voting on such an important day.
Right.
And there's so many resources available online that will give you direct access.
Right. And we highly recommend that you do not mail it in.
Right.
It's
Yes.
kind of too late. So if you can drop it off at
Yeah.
find a drop box near you, ballot drop box, which is usually like I dropped mine off today at our city hall, and it was, you just go in there and there was no line. I'm sure
Yeah.
tomorrow is going to be crazy,
Yeah.
but it's really simple to find a box and drop it off.
It really
Yeah.
does seem to be like the best thing to do to be positive, because there are things like
Yes.
in I believe it's Minnesota. They've had cases, court cases right now that are being adjudicated of whether it's the day that it's postmarked or the day there's a limit after it's received. I don't think the voters are, necessarily keeping up with the court cases,
Right.
day by day. So the best bet right there is to drop it off, hand deliver it.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Also, I know some states, you know, if you sent it in by mail, some states were already counting early. But then there's other states where like they will wait until election day and then start counting the mail ballot. So also it's a very different time, you know, like
Yeah.
there's a lot of first time voters, but also I think for a lot of us, it's the first time voting during a pandemic. So there's been a lot of resources that have been geared towards and made available to really make sure that we have the access that we need.
And Sina, do we always have has there always been a ballot drop box every election, or is it just because of the pandemic?
I think as I feel like there's always been that option to vote by mail beforehand. So it wasn't, you know, I don't think it was ever an issue until now, because it has been strongly recommended. And
Right.
by the looks of it, like with what Carl said, of over 60-70% already of
Right.
people voting, you know, sending it in by mail, that's huge because people don't want to stand in line, you know, and also we have to think about the safety precautions, right?
Right.
Of making sure we're safe if we do decide to go in and vote in person.
Right.
And so, yeah, so also I know another resource you can do if you don't know how to locate your local drop box is you can visit your whatever state you're located in, the Secretary of State. They usually on their website they'll have like they'll direct you to resources of where you can exactly find the drop box close to you.
Yeah, I usually go in to vote because I like the feel of going to go vote. And this year was the first time I actually filled out the ballot to drop it off. It was so easy. And I think I'm going to do that from here on out.
Yeah.
Even though the polling place is across the street from me.
Right. Yeah,
but it was so easy. It was so easy.
I totally get it. I know I've always gone in person as well. So it's very different this time around.
Right, right. So yeah, we highly recommend you either drop off your ballot
There's a key
instead of
point.
mailing it, right?
Yeah, and there's a key point right in that slide. It says use black or blue ink. There are ballots that are being thrown out
Yes.
because they're in pencil or they're in like marker. There's technical pieces to this. Make sure that you're
Yes.
following instructions. It's really confusing because there is no federal standard for voting. Every state's going to handle voting differently. So
Yep.
it's hard for Sina to say this is how it works because
Right.
there's 50 different versions of it. So
Yeah.
things like that. Use black or blue ink. Follow the instructions. Sign where it says to sign. Just pay close attention to your vote.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up because I know, that it's a lot of times we don't think about those technicalities, right? Of like really filling it in and making sure we stay like within the bubble. Like, so those things matter. It makes a huge difference.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tens of thousands of ballots are going to get thrown out or disqualified because of little things like that. And when you
Right.
think of Trump winning electoral votes, and not, I'm just kind of saying Trump, but I'm saying they were that valuable in certain voting precincts. 2,500 votes made the difference on whether an electoral vote went one way or the other. So it's important to vote, but it's very important. Pay attention to the details wherever you're voting.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people I know personally are choosing to want to go in person and do this just because they don't feel that, doing it by mail they don't feel like it count. So they'd rather go in person. So I totally get that too.
Right.
Which is kind of crazy because mail-in voting wasn't the boogeyman until this election.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, it's
Right.
I like
boogeyman,
that.
it's
Right.
it's under the bed looking like it's crazy. But it's just this election is when it's made out to be, some crazy risky thing. There's entire states that vote by all mail-in, like Oregon or
Oregon.
Colorado. Yeah, like it's not what it's made out to be this year. Unfortunately,
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
out
Yeah,
there.
for sure. It came in and took over Halloween.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
That's what I could have went as mail-in voting. That's what I should have found a costume somehow to dress up.
Right.
Voting.
Right. I know.
Awesome. And then
Next
of
one.
course,
Sorry.
if
ahead.
you're going in tomorrow, you need to wear a mask, social
Mhm.
distance, wear comfortable shoes because you might be standing in line for a minute, and bring your ballot, your paperwork, know where who and what you're going to vote for, and your propositions. Make sure you know all that. I'm all into it. I'm all into it.
We may be
Yes.
showbizing you, Sina, and if we are, we apologize.
No,
Sorry.
it is those things matter and it really is important. And I was just looking up that too. Like if you do go in person, like, you want to be prepared, wear comfortable shoes, take a snack, take some water, because it might take some time. And something else I was thinking about too is, like my parents, their first language isn't English. And so they want to go in. And so I know I have to be there to kind of like help them get situated so they make sure they're okay as far as like translating or anything.
Right.
And so, yeah, so, for those of you who have your parents or grandparents want to go in and vote, just make sure that you or someone else in the household is there to help with any translations that they might need.
Yeah, I think in California, up to 2 people can go in and help somebody vote. So in
Yeah.
those situations, that's a right at the poll to go in and help somebody if they need help.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so this next slide is a great tool for folks to track your ballot. So Brink app is one of the few resources that includes that we've seen that includes accessibility information and rights for disabled voters, which is really crucial because for my parents, they it's they can't like walk straight a lot of the times. So I have to make sure that I'm there to like kind of help them because they have canes. So those things are really important as well. And a lot of times too, for for other folks who are um, disabled, and we want to make sure that their votes get in and get counted as well. So this is a great resource too. Next slide. So another cool resource is through the Voting Rights Lab. You can also track your vote here as well. Because voter suppression is real, we want to make sure that people have the tools they need to advocate for themselves. And this website is pretty comprehensive and regularly updated on voting rights. So here's just another resource that folks can use and have access to, especially when things are moving so quickly. Um, you want to make sure like you're up to date and up to speed on things. Next slide. And then literally just one day left.
Right.
If you haven't heard, but really just emphasizing the importance of our vote as Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. And pacificavote.org is a great resource as well. You can also find Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander voter guides in English and in language on there. So there's a lot, of information at our fingertips, and I really recommend, a lot of young people out there to help out our parents and our grandparents when it comes to this, because I know for myself, it's, they're not super tech savvy. So, so this is what we're here for. And we want to make sure we let our community know. Tell your friends, tell your family.
Right.
It's such an important election. So, and it really matters and it counts.
I think with
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Nackie.
Oh, I just had a question. Like my parents vote every year. Every year they vote. They that's, they love it. So, but they're born in American Samoa. Do their votes count? I'm just checking, making sure. Like I always tell my mom, "Oh, your vote doesn't count." She's like, "Yes, it does." I was like, "Okay, let me ask."
Yeah, I feel like with the territories, with American Samoa and with Guam, I can't say if they do count. I feel like, yeah, I don't want to give you a wrong answer.
Right.
U.S. nationals votes.
Yeah.
U.S. nationals votes count in national elections. So if you're in Guam, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, your votes do count. And I actually had that question last, and I always was like not positive. So last year when I was at the polls, I asked one of the workers at the polls, and she was pretty sure, but then she sent me to like the guy that knows everything that's there every year. And he was, there was no ambiguity about it. He was 100% sure that U.S. nationals votes count.
Well, that's awesome. There you go.
Yeah, I feel like it's always a question that comes up, especially for elections. And, a lot of our own community is always wondering, what's the case with that. But yeah, I think for sure national elections versus like other elections, I know it's those are different. But yeah.
Awesome. Your vote counts, Mom.
Yes.
I'm like, it doesn't count.
I think one of the things that we'll learn from this election is that mail-in voting, and I think that that's why it's made out to be what it is, it allows people more access to voting, which is good. I think that early voting is going to be hopefully seen to be what it's been in the 2020 election. Is it's good because it allows a bigger window of time to vote. The smaller the window of time, like if you got to get to the polls, you know, at between X and X on this day, that excludes people. So the bigger the window it has, the more access there is to voting, that it's just easier to vote, and that's more inclusive. In a democracy, that counts. I was really concerned because this country has voter suppression in its DNA. I mean, from 1787, from the day they created um, the Constitution with the Electoral College and the 3/5 compromise, all that, women couldn't even vote till the 1900s. Voter suppression is just in this country's DNA. So when COVID-19 came around, I was thinking, oh man, here comes the excuse to find a way to suppress votes. And the mail-in thing, I think that's why it became what it is, or what people are saying it is, that there's massive fraud because it's making it more available to, more people. At least that's how I see it. Is that how you see it, Sina, that the mail-in has allowed people easier access?
Yep. Yeah, that I totally agree with you on that. I think it's given people more access, but at the same time, like I feel like the politicization of, the pandemic and the election at the same time, it's also easy to, like take advantage of that as well. And so there's so many civil rights organizations and so many um, coalitions that are working to protect these rights and to make sure we get the right information out there as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things our community can do, is become a known community for voting, because then we're sought after for our vote, whether we vote blue or red. It's just most important to be known as a community that votes. And then, with that, you get to, have some pull when you talk to the city council person, or you talk to your assemblyman, or whoever it may be. But if you're part of a community that, and that's what politicians do. They look at you, do you vote? Like, do you represent people that vote? And the example I would point to is the Asian community. If an Asian community leader speaks to a politician, they're going to listen because they believe that, the Asian community votes. So the work that everybody's doing to get people to vote in the PI community is so needed. I mean, it is, I think back to what, Rita had talked about, and I'll probably get it wrong, but, the community or the world you want is going to take civic engagement.
Right.
Yep.
That's what you're doing by getting this information out. Is there any more work to be done for EPIC in terms of the voting after the election? So on Wednesday, does the hey, get out and vote, does that completely stop and you move on to another thing, or are there things that you guys are doing after the election?
Yeah, so as far as post-election, which I feel like, a lot of community organizations have been trying to think around, right, is what's next, right? Because ultimately, whatever the turnout is, we still have to build, right? And so that's what we are trying to process and strategize, right? Also, it's not lost on me, all the work that has been led up to this election, including Rita's work, right? And so post-election, it's really about what are the next steps, right? At the same time, I think it's really important to acknowledge, just a lot of the tension that's been going on, right? In the Black community, right? In the Indigenous community, which we are always going to stand behind. And I've been hearing a lot of conversations, you know, like with some of our national partners about what do we do in the event of a potential, you know, contested election or a potential uprising, right? How do we respond? What is our role as an organization to respond to this, but also what is the message that we need to get out to our own community, right? Like obviously we want our folks to be safe, but at the same time, I just feel like it's a really I feel like all the stakes are really high, you know, and everything is just very heightened right now. Like the level um, of where the directions, you know, these both campaigns are going in and how our community is responding. um, you know, we're still going to think about, you know, however this turns out. I think our goal is to figure out um, how do we support, um, you know, our Black and our Indigenous community members, but also what role do we play in getting what next steps are, right, in order to build, in order to rebuild, right, um, in order to think about a lot of issues that come up for us that directly impact our community, right? Immigration, education, health, all those things are on the line. All those things are on the ballot, right? And so when people ask, what are you voting for? Um, you know, there's something that Rita taught me is there's not one thing that we're all tied to that doesn't connect to a local policy.
Right.
Right. And so I think when we think about what we care about, what we value, right? Our kids' education in the middle of a pandemic, right? Online learning, distant learning, that's a whole nother thing, right? So how are we gonna hold accountable um, the next administration of making sure that there's resources, right, available for our kids, you know, for education, right? When it comes to health, what has been done during this pandemic, right? We literally lost someone because of COVID who fought tooth and nail to make sure our community was protected, right? And it's been on us, right? The onus has been on us Pacific Islanders, like to make sure we advocate for ourselves. Um, so we need to make sure whoever is next is held accountable, right? Immigration. A lot of our folks have different pathways of citizenship to this country. COFA Medicaid restoration is on the line, right? It's up for renegotiation in 2023. What are we going to do as a community to make sure that happens? And what do we need to do to keep pushing for that as well, as making sure that COFA folks take the lead on that, but how do we, you know, walk alongside them to make sure we support and advocate that for them as well. So there's a lot on the line, you know, and the way I see it is whatever we value and we care about, take that, you know, take that to the ballot, take that to the polling place and use your power to vote, because that's what we have, you know, that's our right.
Right. I think also now is the time, right? The pandemic is going on. So many people are online now, just on social media, just on everything. And like the census, where we were pushing the census, I'm hoping that a lot of PIs fills out their census form, just because it's now. Now is the time for us to be seen and be heard. You know, there's so many things, especially people of color, that has been going wrong, and that we fight together with the African American community, because they pretty much, we're stepping on their backs for all, right, Carl? We always talk about how they lead the way for, you know, all the fights. I mean, we have our fight too, but it's just theirs is more visual and out there now, so that now is the time for us to vote and be seen and be heard. And so I just really encourage everyone to get out there and vote, and really just make your voice be heard. Really, just, we need to be seen and heard. There's an anonymous attendee that said territories unfortunately don't cast electoral votes for the presidency, although they do participate in caucuses and primaries.
Yeah, I think that my understanding of it was that, yes, they're not part of an electoral college, but the vote would be counted towards the popular vote.
Right.
An individual vote would be, but that's absolutely correct. The territories are not part of the electoral college, which again, if you go back to the foundation or the formation of the electoral college, it's voter suppression in the definition of voter suppression. The electoral college was created to give smaller states a bigger voice. And really, it had, if you look at it, it's racist in the way that it began, because it was to keep the southern states in the United States. So, I mean, there's pieces of that. When you go back through the history of voting, it used to be okay that companies could tell people how to vote. So your company, if you work for General Electric, they could tell you you're going to vote for X, Y, or Z, or we'll fire you. They used to be able to hire what they call shoulder blockers, where they could just hire big dudes to go stand and block people with their, to block polling places. It wasn't until long after the vote began that the tickets used to be huge, and your party would be a certain color. So if you were going to the polling place, you had this big blue or red or whatever the colors were, but it wasn't a secret vote. So you would get there, and if you were the only, of your color card voting, then there's pressure right there. So it's just the way that the country has been with the vote has been, I've always said it. I've said voter suppression is in this country's DNA, and to think that it doesn't exist today, it exists in the form of, redistricting, gerrymandering, and like limiting mail-in vote, and I mean, it's still alive, and it's still, one vote doesn't necessarily equal another vote, and that's still a problem the country needs to deal with.
Right. Leonora, I'm sorry.
One of the things that I'm sorry, that I was getting at, like, after, right, is I've always been a big advocate of know your local elections. So it's not just every 4 years. It's know who we're voting in where I live. We're voting on the water district, who's on the water district board, who's on the board of education, like all those things. Like, it's important to come out every 4 years when there's a presidential election. But what's going to affect you the most day to day is probably going to be who's your city council person, who's your district supervisor, who's your, your board of education. Those things are things that I think that if we get, continue the push to vote to our community, but it doesn't have to be for a president. It needs to be like, get educated and get informed and get involved, be in civic engagement locally. I think that's a big piece of keeping our community with our eyes on the vote.
Right. Very important to do that. Just a Facebook comment from Leonora Seeley, who's checking in from Utah. Everyone is very skeptical, but the only way to be heard is get out there and vote. Your voice can be voiced, but we have to leave the safety and comfort of our homes to accomplish this. Very true. Thank you, Leonora. and she was skeptical about the mailing process. So she's taking herself and leaving her house tomorrow to go vote. So do what you think is or what's comfortable for you, but also be safe.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And I think right now, it's a very uncertain time. It's not business as usual,
Right.
right? For a lot of us. And so I don't, I'm not surprised, why folks are feeling that way. And, if there's a time to weigh in, right, on issues that matter to us most, or to make sure our voices are heard, it's now. It's this opportunity right here. Just like it was with the census to get counted, it's the same thing that applies here as well. And I'm glad that Carl brought up voter suppression, because a lot of the resources that were mentioned earlier were designed to combat voter suppression, right? And so there's been a lot of states, right, that tried to, even in recent years, like really try to make it hard for folks to vote, particularly the Black communities of color, the disabled, right? This is literally a fundamental right for everyone, regardless, right, of your race or of your ability. And people are trying to make it harder. And so that's why it's so important now more than ever, why these resources do exist, is to combat that and to really get the right information out there.
Yeah, definitely. It's crazy to think that there's almost 2,000 fewer polling places in the United States today than there was in 2012, because of a Supreme Court decision in 2013 that allowed states to remove polling places. And where did they remove them from? They removed them from places where people of color vote. It's important to know that. I think that if people knew that, they would, one, make a drive or do whatever they needed to do to overcome it, but two, advocate for legislation or advocate for change so that the state can't remove polling places from certain neighborhoods or certain areas that's going to impact certain people more than other people. But I don't think that it's hard to get the information out there so that people understand it. I think they understand it when they go to the poll and, there's an hour and a half wait. They understand something like, wow, this is a pain to get this done. But I don't think that, the more global knowledge of, look, these were removed intentionally. Like, this was done. The states run the elections the way that they want to run the elections. We talked about that earlier in the show. So if they decide that a polling place goes, then a polling place goes. And those are things that I think that people knew. They would find a way to overcome it, and they'd get, I'll go back to the same thing. They get civically engaged, because that's not the world they want to be in.
Yeah.
What time tomorrow, after all by the time the polls close in California, they usually call what time, Carl? Do they usually say, oh, so-and-so has won this? And
it depends on how close it is. So they're not going to declare a winner if it's close. And, there's some of the, the thought process of, all the mail-in voting is supposedly, leaning Democratic, right? So if they're counting votes, then it's going to appear that Biden's ahead because, more Republican voters are go to the poll on the day of. And that's not necessarily true. There's some states that are, more Republicans are doing mail-in voting than Democrats. So it's hard to say what they'll do, but they're not going to declare a winner unless it is, clear and obvious. And, there could be I don't know what they call it, with a speech where they give up, and there's some official word for it, or a concession speech. So if Biden or Trump gives a concession speech, which I think there's zero chance of tomorrow, then they could make an announcement at that point, but it's going to have to be a big, big margin of victory one way or the other for them to say tomorrow night who won. I'd be pretty surprised if somehow all of our pain and agony ends tomorrow at like 9 o'clock our time. I'd be surprised if somehow that works. But yeah, it's gonna have to be clear cut for them to make an announcement.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Carl. I think because there's been an increase in mail-in voting this time around, it's yeah, we can definitely expect there to get delayed results.
Yeah, and there's some states are counting now the mail-in votes. Some states don't count mail-in votes until the polls close. I mean, each state does it a different way.
Yeah.
So I think it's just going to be it's difficult. I would be surprised if somebody, unless it's like a total complete landslide, and who knows with the turnout, 70% by the day before, maybe those are all people that would have went to the polls on the day of, so we don't get a big that much of a difference tomorrow. But there's states, Hawaii's at 110, Texas is at 108. A ton of states are between 95 and 100. So, at minimum, those states are going to be, some have already exceeded it.
Right.
But I think the work that Epic has done and that you've communicated, Sina, is so timely. I mean, there are still people, obviously there's people that haven't voted yet. So to have this information available literally the night before, and, are there any specific measures or ballots that are not ballots, but measures or propositions that you've seen that in your mind think, wow, that is really directly Pacific Islander centric?
Yeah, I know speaking for um, Pacific Islanders in California, right? And I don't want to speak for other ballot or proposition measures in other states as well, but I know for California, I know Proposition 16, I believe. I know in California it was, um, like it had allowed. I know it has to do with affirmative action. So, excuse me. Before in California, it's actually been banned that colleges and universities couldn't or did not allow, as far as the process when a student does apply, right? It didn't allow the school or um, the admission people who do admissions for colleges and universities to factor that in as far as like race and racial background. And so I know the focus has a lot of that has been specifically on the Asian American community, because I know in that community alone, there's a huge divide when it comes to affirmative action. But also, I think what a lot of people miss and what a lot of people don't tend to pay attention to is all the other communities of color that this impacts, including ours, including Pacific Islanders, right? And for for a country that has, gone into, Hawaii and our islands and, heavily influenced, as far as taking land, right? And creating military bases and bombing our islands, right? You know, we should get everything that we deserve, especially education, right? And I think one thing that we always want to make sure we teach our or teach and also empower our young leaders and our young students is be your full selves when you go into academia, right? You do not have to leave, you being someone or Tongan or Chukis at the door. You take that in the classroom because that is just as important, right? So I know education is a huge priority for us, both at the state and local level, but also at the national level as well. So I know that specific proposition is on the ballot and is something that we do support and stand behind as EPIC. So I know it also impacts a lot of other communities of color as well. So that's something that I've been trying to keep track keep track of lately, and just because literally these decisions will impact the next couple of years, even the future, right, of how these policies are going to shape and change in what's to come.
Yeah, so that's Prop 16 is I think it's an amendment to the California Constitution. An example I would give is affirmative action used to allow state universities or state companies to take into account underrepresented or underserved communities and hire from them, using that as a reason to hire because they're underrepresented. That was taken out in, I'm not sure, 95 or 96. And then the measure is to reinstate that and put that back in place. Prop 15 in California is expand the tax base with property taxes for big companies, non-commercial, and the taxes would be put towards largely towards education. Okay. Important to know, got a lot of California listeners on there, so it's good to know where EPIC and Sina stand with that. And by all means, education is really that's the game changer for communities, for people of color. That is the game changer. And the constitutional amendment, Prop 16, affirmative action is always going to be of huge interest to people of color. So, Nackie, anything we leave out?
I don't think so. I had all my questions were answered. Thank you, Sina. Our main thing is just we want Pacific Islanders, our community, to go vote. Vote. If you have your ballot, do not mail it. Find your closest drop box. You can find that by you can go to Pacifica Vote and find your information there. Just vote, be seen, be heard. This is our time. This is our time. And if you love the work that Rita was doing, then this is how you can honor her memory, is go vote.
Awesome. Sina, anything we missed today?
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers all the bases. And thank you, Carl, for bringing up local elections as well. Those are just as important. And I think just one thing that I notice when, when we are advocating on the Hill with different members of Congress in the House or in the Senate, especially to representatives who do represent large populations of our community, there's a lot of times where they don't know anything about us, right? And it's because, partially it's because we're not voting, we're not participating. And so we really, really have to shift that and also normalize that as well. And that happens both in the local election and also in the national ones as well. So yeah, and also, Rita did such an amazing job, with our community. She really fought so hard for us. So it's super important that, you know, we show up for her and the work that she's done in this way.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Sina.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sina.
Thank you both.
So it's always a special time for PolyByDesign when we get to work with Tavai or Sina or anybody with Epic, because when we first started, Nackie's going to remember this. When we first started PolyByDesign, we're like, we're going to promote and push positive Pacific Islander role models, and we came across the Epic website and like congressional hearings and legislation and all these things, and we were like, maybe we were so blown away by the job that Epic was doing that we actually took pause at what we were doing. Like, do we even want to, like, look, this group is out there doing it. And we realized our job is just to promote you, like promote Epic, and promote the things that you're doing. So today's a special day for us because we're here with you, and we're actually with a program that we looked at like literally in awe when we first started. So
True.
we love the time. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Epic. Thank you, Sina.
Rita, we love you. Fly high.
Yes.
Rest in love, and we're going to stay down here and be civically engaged in your name. Okay?
Right.
Thank you for joining Koviki Talks, and we'll see you next week at what time, Nackie?
5 p.m. Every Monday at 5 p.m. Come join us. Thank you so much, Sina.
Thank you.
for your
Thank you
work.
both.